Hello and welcome to my Toronto 2023 Regionals tier list for the Pokemon trading card game. Today I will go over the decks that I think have the best chance for success at the upcoming Toronto Regionals. And yeah, I will also have an exclusive video going over more in-depth stuff like specific deck lists and techs for the decks I talk about today. That will be exclusively available for Metafy members. The Metafy membership is really good if you are competing regularly at the Pokemon trading card game. So with the $5 annually or $10 a month monthly membership, you get access to all of my articles, all of my videos, and you also get a $10 coupon once a month for coaching as well. So these videos were from the past two top tier episodes. We will have another top tier episode that comes out the same exact time as this video is on YouTube. So definitely go check that out if you're interested in more coverage. I also have free articles over there available if you're not interested in any of the paid content. So now let's get into this tier list. So the last three events that we'll look at for this format of 151 being the newest set are Peoria Regionals, Sacramento Regionals, and Lille Regionals. At Peoria Regionals, we saw Kyogre win the event, with Turbo Lost Zone getting second place. The biggest surprise out of this event was the Sablezard in top 8. That I don't think really anyone would have expected. And also something to note is that Charizard EX could not break through any farther than top 16. At Sacramento, we saw Charizard's highest placement be 27th place. I'm sorry, 23rd place with the Charizard Arceus Bibarel build, but Charizard EX really fell off. Then we had Kyogre at 3rd and Kyogre at 7th. So there's such a small difference between the first place and 3rd place and 8th place at a tournament. Just one different play going your way, one draw going different can be the difference between that. So I think it's really important to note that Kyogre has been successful consistently with this first place and then the 8th place here. And even just Turbo Lost Zone, which the 3rd place list by Sawyer at Sacramento was the Turbo hybrid variant of Kyogre with the Dragonite V and the Raikou V, so that's definitely worth mentioning as well. Colorless Lugia did win Sacramento. My top 2 picks for this event were Colorless Lugia and Turbo Lost Zone. Sawyer, like I said, kind of played Turbo Lost Zone. It was a Turbo Lost Zone Kyogre hybrid, but Colorless Lugia was a really good pick for this event. Then over to the Lille Regionals. Of course, this isn't in the United States, but it was a really large event with a lot of great players. So I still think it's worth looking at, even though Toronto is a North America event. We had Turbo Lost Zone get 2nd place. Note that there's no Drapion in it. Then we had Lost Zone Goodra at 7th place. Notice that there's no Drapion V. And then we had another Lost Zone box down here at 13th place. Again, no Drapion V. It's important to note the lack of Drapion V because Fusion Mew VMAX won the event. And there was also a double Turbo Mew in top 8. And then also another Fusion Mew at 9th, and then another DT Mew at 17th. So Mew had a pretty good weekend in Lille. It did not do well in Sacramento, and it did okay in it did better than expected, I'd say, in Peoria. It got 3rd place by Rowan, the double turbo at Luxray, and then 2 more double turbos down here at 16th and 17th. So I think Mew's place in the format kind of came to a head at Lille, and I think a lot of people are going to default to Mew, or they were already thinking about playing Mew because it's the deck they know the best, and then they saw it win Lille, so now they're going to definitely play it. So if you're playing a Lost Zone deck, whether it be something like Goodra Lost Zone or Turbo Lost Zone, I would definitely play Drapion V. If you're playing Kyogre, you have a positive matchup without the Drapion V. If you're playing Tina, maybe consider Choice Belt or Cleansing Gloves or Fourth Path to the Peak. Or maybe even a Drapion, but I think I'd rather have Choice Belt or more Path to the Peak or Cleansing Gloves before I put in a Drapion into Tina. So now that we've looked over those results, let's make our tier list. So in the S tier, I'm going to put the decks in the S tier that I would personally be playing if I'm trying to top 8 or win the event. I will not be going to Toronto because I have been struggling to get a passport for the past 2+ years at this point. I made some progress, so maybe I'll be able to go to a Canadian event eventually. But no passport, so even though Toronto is kind of like East Coast, I can't go to it. So what I would be playing if I was going to Toronto and trying to win the event or top 8 the event, which is pretty much my goal at every regionals now with the current layout. I don't think there's really a reason to just go for consistent day 2s and farm top 128s. So Turbo Lost Zone box and Colorless Lugia would be my top 2 picks. They were my top 2 picks for Sacramento as well, and I don't think it's really changed. I really like Colorless Lugia. Let's open up Alexander's list. We have the Drapion V. That covers the Gardevoir matchup a bit and the Mew matchup a bit. We also have an incredible single prize attacker in Snorlax. This makes the deck just really hard to get through because if you boss up Archeops and knock those out, the Archeops can just prematurely set up the board with energy, and you have the Snorlaxes that you're not knocking out in the process. You're also waking them up if they didn't already have therapy whenever you boss around them. And they're swinging 180 or 160 a turn, which is going to two-shot everything. You have the Mew EX, which helps against Charizard if you get the Charizard player onto uneven prizes when they're at 1 prize remaining. Genome hacking can copy the Charizard EX attack, which is escaping my mind at the moment. As long as you don't have a double turbo on the Mew, you'll one-shot them. You have Luxray for the mirror match. Luxray also can help against Rapid Strike Inteleon VMAX. I think there's something else that's Lightning Weak that I'm skimming over. And then you also have the Weird Ear V. This helps against Mew VMAX. It helps against Charizard EX. Pretty much anything with very, very high HP, because the weakness of Colorless Lugia is that your damage output is pretty limited other than your Weird Ear V turn. Colorless Lugia also has a naturally good matchup against Giratina Lost Zone, against Turbo Lost Zone box, and it has an odd matchup against Kyogre because it doesn't play Manaphy, so it is open to the Kyogre turn, but it does play a good bit of Iono. It's forcing the single price Snorlaxes on you, and you can't clean those up with Lost Mine due to Snorlax's ability Unfazed Fat that prevents effects of attacks, and you also have Collapsed Stadium to remove damaged Pokemon. So you do have a lot of options against Kyogre, even though you can't block that last turn Kyogre. You can still force them into an unfavorable prize trade, so probably even at worst versus Kyogre, and then favored versus Turbo and Giratina Lost Zone. And then you also have, like I mentioned, you have Drapion V, you have Mew EX, Luxray, Weird Ear. These Pokemon cover a multitude of different matchups. So Colorless Lugia is just a very, very all-around solid deck with a lot of powerful cards all coming together, which is why it would be one of my top picks for the event. My second top pick for the event, like I mentioned, would be Turbo Lost Zone. So Jack Carter got second at Peoria with this Turbo Lost Zone build. I definitely want the Drapion V back in, like I mentioned, for the Mew VMAX matchup to really secure that. If I thought Mew VMAX was falling off, good players wouldn't play it, it wouldn't be very popular in day 2, then maybe I would omit the Drapion V. But now that Mew VMAX just won a regional, it's been consistently placing within the top 8. So we got the 1st place, the 6th place, the 9th place here in Lille, and then at Peoria we had the 3rd place, the 16th place, the 17th place. Sacramento, Mew didn't do as well. There were still 9 in day 2 though. So with that, I would definitely add Drapion V back into Lost Zone box. There's also this consideration of, do you run that 3rd Psychic Energy or not? It's really just a matter of how many times do you want your games to come down to a really hard Comfey decision of, do I Lost Zone the Sableye or the Psychic Energy? A lot of times those plays can be prevented by searching out the energy or the Pokemon you need beforehand, but it can't always be like that, and sometimes just the 2 Psychic Energy will cost you games. So my considerations based on Jack's list specifically would be add a Drapion V and add a 3rd Psychic Energy. So I feel that Colorless Lugia and Turbo Lost Zone box are 2 of the best plays for this event and would be the 2 decks I was choosing between. because they are pretty well rounded. There's not a lot that you play these decks into where you feel like you cannot win. Inteleon Urshifu is pretty hard for Lost Zone box, especially if you're not playing the Mew EX, and also if you're not playing the Drapion V. Both of those cards can be helpful against Inteleon Urshifu. The Drapion V isn't as helpful without Choice Belt as well, but it's still pretty good because you can attack for free or 1 energy if they have 3 Rapid Strikes on the board. But I also want you to keep in mind that this is a very diverse format, and I don't think metagaming is very important in this format. It's or at least metagaming for specific archetypes. It's better to metagame by having a deck that's well prepared against a lot of different strategies, or adding cards like Judge, Iono, Path that are good against a multitude of decks or groups of decks. I don't really want to tech against one specific deck if I can help it. Of course, putting Drapion V into Lost Zone box, it's not just for Mew. It's also going to help against Gardevoir because Drapion V, if you have a double Mirage Gate turn, or you're playing Raihan plus Mirage Gate, you can knock out a Gardevoir EX with that. And then also, like I mentioned, it can also be good against Inteleon Urshifu. So just in general, before we move on with this tier list, I would avoid teching for very specific matchups. If you can look for techs that will help against a multitude of decks, unless that one specific matchup you really truly believe that it is going to be imperative that you do well into it to do well at this tournament, then I suppose play that tech. But always look for more generalizable techs in such a diverse field where so many different decks can see success. Now, in the A tier, I don't necessarily believe that Lugia, Archeops, and Lost Zone box are that much ahead of other decks. These are just the 2 decks that I personally believe I would have the best chance of top 8ing or winning the event with going into this tournament. So down into A tier, these are also decks that I would not be surprised at all to see in the top 8 or even win the event. And honestly, there's going to be a good bit in A tier for me because I do think that this is a pretty wide open tournament and format and metagame. So Gardevoir EX is definitely very good, but I don't want to play Gardevoir EX, and so I'm not suggesting it as highly as Lugia and Lost Zone, because if you lose game 1, if you lose a close game 1 with Gardevoir EX, you're essentially destined to tie at worst. And you might also tie at best. You're destined to tie at best. And you might also say, well, Lost Zone Kyogre is similar to that, right? Now, I also want to note that Lost Zone Kyogre, unfortunately, is not a deck archetype on the Trainer Hill tier list creator, but we're going to just assume that Lost Zone box represents Turbo and Kyogre. Their matchups are pretty similar, except Turbo... I'd say Turbo with a Drapion is a pretty similar matchup spread compared to Turbo Kyogre, except Turbo Lost Zone can end games quicker and can actually go aggressive in some games. So example, like against Lugia, you can go for that turn 1 7 in the Lost Zone, knock out a Lugia with a Dragonite or Raikou. If you're playing the Raymond Long version that Azul also played with the Zamazenta without the V Pokemon, then you don't have those turbo and aggressive plays available to you. But even then, Turbo Lost Zone Kyogre can end games in kind of an instant. Even if the opponent has 4 prize cards, 5 prize cards, you can still get there in a matter of 2 turns. Whereas with Gardevoir, no matter how good you are, or how fast you're making actions, the games with Gardevoir just naturally take more physical turns to finish. And so I really just don't see Gardevoir as being good enough to go into the tournament with that disadvantage to time. Like if you play against a new player, or a newer player who's a little less experienced, they're not slow playing, but they're playing slower. There's a very gray area about what you can actually do about that, and it can just really stink if you're playing a deck like Gardevoir where you can't close out those games. Even if you're playing better, even if your deck is better, you're still going to take more turns to finish the games, typically with Gardevoir, because it is a setup deck. So because of those reasons, Gardevoir is a very good deck, but it's not a deck that I would be playing to this event. I still wouldn't be surprised to see it make top 8. I'm also going to put Fusion Mew in the A tier, And I'm going to put specifically Fusion Mew and not DTE Mew in the A tier because I expect more Drapion V, I expect more Spiritomb, I expect more of the techs that Fusion Mew can circumvent a little bit more because it has single prize attackers that aren't Mew V Max, it has Fusion Strike energy to protect Genesect from Spiritomb. So while I put Fusion Mew in A, I'm also going to put DTE Mew down into the next tier under that. And I'll talk about the definition of B tier in just a moment. Next, I'm going to put Single Strike Lugia in the A tier. I do think Single Strike Lugia is a little less smooth. It can be a little more clunky because you play the Single Strike energies, which are specific to some of your Pokemon. You play the Urns of Vitality, which can be dead cards when you don't need your Single Strike energies back. But it does have a trade-off because it comes with Tyranitar V, and Tyranitar V is really strong because of its Dark typing, so it hits Mew VMAX and Gardevoir for weakness. It's also very strong because it can knock out Comphase and Sableye and the small attackers in Lost Zone while also milling the opponent. And just getting rid of a couple of resources in that deck, just getting rid of one, like a Super Rod against Turbo Lost Zone or an Energy Recycler against Lost Zone Kyogre, those can be really big deals, especially when you're milling them a few times over the course of the game, and you're also presenting this Tyranitar V, which is really, really hard, if not impossible, sometimes for them to KO. When you have a V-Guard energy on it, their Dragonite V can't knock that out unless they play Choice Belt, or they damaged the Tyranitar prior with like a Lost Mine or something, which isn't technically a one-hit knockout. So I think for now I'm going to close off the A tier at that. So in a recap real quick, S and A tier, I think these decks, these are what I expect to make up the top 8 or have the best chances for top 8 at the tournament. And now going down to B tier, these aren't decks that I necessarily think will do poorly, but I do think they will fall short of making it into top 8. So we're starting with the DT Mew, and I already gave my reasonings for that. Next, I want to put Chien Palbak's Caliber here. I think Chien Palbak's Caliber is a high roll deck. We've seen people like Grant Shen and Jared Grimes show some consistent performances from it. But I do think more often than not, it's a little more affected by variance than some of these other decks I have in here, which is why I don't trust it too much, but it does have results, which is putting it up into the B tier for me. So the B tier decks, I expect these to mostly float around like top 32-ish area as their peak performances. So we're also going to put Charizard EX here. So I'll put Charizard EX and Charizard Arceus here. So Charizard EX is assumed to be the Pidgeot version. Charizard Arceus is also assumed to have Pidgeot in there, but it can have Bibarel instead of Pidgeot, but I still think Pidgeot is the best version, whether you're playing Arceus or not playing Arceus. I did forget to put Giratina Lost Zone Box into A tier, so I'm going to do that now. So Giratina Lost Box still has a really, really respectable matchup spread in terms of how well it is poised to do against the top meta decks on paper. Although it can be a little bit of a clunky deck when compared to something like Turbo Lost Zone Box. I think Turbo Lost Zone Box is probably the most consistent deck or even most reliable deck at allowing you to play the game, which is why I rate it so highly. And I also feel that way about Fusion Mew. Fusion Mew and Lost Zone Box, I feel like I almost always get to actually play the game with them because of the Forest Seal Stones, because of the battle passes. Because of the Pokestops and Lost Zone Box, the Genesect Vs and Fusion Mew. There's just a lot of cards that both of the decks have that lets you see more cards, search more cards, draw more cards, and actually get to play the game, especially in the early turns. So Giratina Lost Zone Box, I think it has a great matchup spread, but the deck functioning could be better, and there's not much left to do for the decks functioning. I think it's been pretty optimized and sits into the A tier. Miraidon Flaffy I'd also put into the B tier here. Again, remember these B tier decks, I don't think they are bad. I just don't expect them to be in the top 8 for this event. I still expect them to do really well. So essentially, if your goal is day 2 and you're playing any of the decks in S, A, or B, I approve of it so long as you understand your matchup conceptualizations for the deck and you fine-tuned your deck list to be functioning and reliable, and also care a little bit about the meta feasibility that the deck has. You know, are you playing a stadium that's going to be good into multiple decks that you face? Are you playing shuffle draw supporters that disrupt your opponent if you think you're going to hit a lot of matchups where disrupting them matters? Things like that. But the most important is that you're playing one of these higher up decks, and that you also understand the matchup concepts for it. Like, if you have been playing Chi and Palback's Caliber and that's all you've been playing and you've never touched a Lugia deck, I wouldn't switch now just because some YouTuber rated Lugia higher than Chi and Pal. The deck that you understand how to set up and what your matchup concepts are for it, and you understand the deck list, you're almost always going to do better than with a deck that you don't know, that you're making unconfident plays with, that you're misplaying, that you don't know how to look 3 turns ahead and see how the game is going to go and do your prize mapping. It's always going to be better with a deck that you understand that for, at least in this current metagame where everything's so diverse and so many decks have a chance to do well. I'm dropping Inteleon Urshifu all the way down here to C for this tournament. I would not play it because I expect an influx of Fusion Mew and I guess DTE Mew. I don't expect an influx of DTE Mew, but I expect it to still be there like it typically is, and then Fusion Mew to have an influx. And then I also think there will be a solid amount of Lugia decks. And then you also have some decks that are closer matchups, like Giratina Lost Zone Box is kind of 50-50. Charizard doesn't always go your way. Same with Chi and Palback's Caliber. So I don't think the metagame is centered. It's not centered enough around decks that Inteleon Urshifu has a great time against for me to think that Inteleon Urshifu is going to be good for this event. Down there in the C tier, I'm also going to put Arceus decks in general. So any Arceus deck you see up here is just going to go into that C tier. Could it make day 2? Absolutely. Will a few Inteleon Urshifus make day 2? I fully expect it to, but I don't think it's going to have a great conversion rate, and I don't think it's going to make it very far into the tournament if the metagame shapes up the way I expect it to. Lost Zone Sablezard is going to be this Lost Zone box Charizard. We'll put that into C tier. It's really weak against Lugia, and it can also just be clunkier than Turbo Lost Zone, and just sometimes feel like it's not a deck. I know people have gotten some good performances. Terrence Miller with the top 8. Alex Szymanski, I think, got a top 32 recently with it, but those are the exceptions and not the rules. Goodra Lost Zone box. I do think it's underrated, but I don't think it's that underrated. Maybe it could go up to B tier by my estimations, but I'd rather put it down here, not to entice anybody to play a deck that isn't fully fleshed out like Goodra Lost Zone. And then the last one is Charizard EX with Lost Zone, and we'll also put that down here. Can it make day 2? Sure. Will a couple make day 2? If enough people play it. But I don't expect it to be one of the successful decks. And then Palkia, Chi, and Pal, I guess we'll put Palkia, Chi, and Pal in D tier. It also sometimes feels like Sablezard, where it just doesn't do much. It is a functioning deck, but it just feels like it doesn't do much. I'll put it in C. We don't need to... Yeah, no, we'll put it in D. I don't think you should play this over Chi and Palback's Caliber with how optimized the Chi and Pal lists have become. So yeah, there is my tier list for the Toronto Regionals 2023. Like I said, if you want even more coverage, deck lists, premium articles, coaching discount, check out the link down below for the Metafy membership. It's $5 a month if you sign up for a year, or it's $10 a month at a monthly basis. You get access to any articles and videos that anybody on Metafy is creating, including my own, as well as $10 off a month on a coaching session. So check that out, as well as all my other sponsors and affiliates, other ways to support my channel. I really, really appreciate it, and you can subscribe here for more Pokemon TCG content. Thanks for watching. Good luck in Toronto if you're attending, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.